you pray with me, please? Most holy and loving God, thank you for joining us this evening here in this place. Thank you for being the Spirit that warms our hearts. Thank you for being that strength that enables us, lifts us, and draws us close to you, just as your presence draws close to us. Open our minds and our hearts so that we may see you and each other clearer. Be with us here, right now, we pray in your most holy name. Amen. I don't know if you've met Troy Perry, but I got to know him over a few years, and he is quite a remarkable man. And when he was asked what it was like to be the one that God chose to start MCC, Troy said, I wasn't the only one that got asked. I was just the first one to say yes. And if you've read his books or you've heard him speak, then you'll know something of the obstacles that he had to overcome. MCC started in 1968, so that's a year before Stonewall. This is a year when in the United States, bars were being raided and people would be arrested just for being gay or lesbian. And they had churches firebombed, people's lives were threatened. Troy's life was constantly under threat. But when you hear him talk about those days, and he talks about MCC's birth and what happened over the years, he always says, you know, all of this happened because of the work of the amazing saints that were around me. And he talks about people that are still with us now, who are pastoring MCCs, and he talks about people that have left us. And a lot of people left us through the early years of the AIDS epidemic, especially in the United States. And you hear this emotion in his voice as he's filled with gratitude for the work that these people do. He's very humble, and yet none of us would be here if it wasn't for him and the work that he did. And it was a lot of work over many years. I personally think of him as kind of, you know, the quintessential hero, that the person who gets out there and puts their own life on hold to get things done for other people, and then doesn't take the credit for it. The question I'd like to ask is, do people like Troy, do they come into the world because they're born that way? Are some people just born kind of heroes, if you like? Or are these people made? Is there something that happens that creates the events that enable a person to act this way? Well, I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek, who's kind of a business guru. And I find him really interesting for a couple of reasons. First, I really like where he's coming from. And secondly, he's not coming from a business angle. He's coming from the angle of an anthropological angle. He's actually an ethnographer. That's what he does for us, what he did for a living. You know what an ethnographer is? Okay, an ethnographer is somebody who goes into various tribes and various peoples, will spend a couple of years there, and then write all about that society. And that book is called an ethnography. And if you want to learn about a society, its ways, and the peoples, then you read ethnographies, and they, like a biography is about a person, an ethnography is about an ethnic group. And what he did was, he turned his attention back on himself and the people that he worked with and the people that he lived with, and used the same techniques to look at himself and look at businesses and the way that organizations worked, and came out with some really fascinating ideas that I think are really cool. Well, one of the things that Simon does is that he talks about how chemicals in the body play an essential part in making us who we are. So at the risk of boring you, because I'm a bit of a geek on this stuff, I want to share with you and 4 of the chemicals that he highlights and talks about. And they are endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. These are the 4 chemicals that he looks at. First of all, let's have a look at endorphins. The job of endorphins, the group of chemicals in your body that we call endorphins, their job, their only job, is to mask pain. And they do this very well. And the reason why we need a set of chemicals to mask pain is because if you're doing a lot of exercise, let's say somebody's running a marathon, or somebody's running for a bus, then when you first start out on that exercise, no matter whether it's 10 yards if you're very unfit or 26 miles if you're fit, when you first start out, your body makes energy through what's called aerobic respiration, which is where the whole idea of aerobic exercise comes from. And aerobic exercise, respiration means that the cells in your body take oxygen, they use the oxygen to burn glucose, sugar, and that's how you get your energy. Unfortunately, what happens is that if you're working out hard, so if you're doing a marathon, at some point, at some mile, or if you're running for the bus after 3 or 4 steps in my case, your muscles are not able to get enough oxygen to burn the glucose that you need, the sugar that you need. So the body plays a really cool trick, and what it does is it switches from what's called aerobic respiration to anaerobic respiration, which means that it doesn't need oxygen to burn the glucose. Now, it's not as an effective method, it doesn't burn all the glucose, and the side effect is that you end up with lactic acid. And of course lactic acid burns, so your muscles start to burn, which is why you hear runners talk about the burn. And that's what it is, it's literally lactic acid in the muscles burning, and that creates pain. Now, normally if you had any sense you would just stop at that point. But if you're running a marathon, you want to run the whole 20-odd miles. And if you're running for the bus, you really want to catch it before it goes. So you push through that, and your body realizes that you're not going to stop, and that you have to do this for whatever reason. So to make sure that you can continue through the pain, it produces endorphins, and endorphins flood the body, and they basically cover all the pain, they mask it, and you feel amazing, which is why runners talk about getting to a certain point where they go through the burn, and then after the burn, there's this feeling of euphoria, this amazing feeling, and they're able to run. I remember years ago, when I was like 18 or 19, I was on holiday on the Italian Riviera, and some friends and I went to have dinner in a little town called Amalfi on the Neapolitan coastline. And we were staying at a hotel at Maiori, which is about 4 miles away. And they, I remember that some folks decided to wait for the bus and get the bus back to Maiori, and I decided that I would just run, and that I would get there first. I mean, you know, I'm young. So, and I can remember, it's up and down hill, this coastline, it's not all flat. And I got like the second hill, and my lungs were burning, and everything was burning, and then suddenly there was just this feeling of euphoria, this amazing, extraordinary feeling of being at one with everything that was happening. And I got my stride, and I just ran, and I was able to look at the coastline, and it was a beautiful day, and it was just amazing. So I got to Maiori, and an hour later I was in agony, because all the damage that I'd done running suddenly caught up, the endorphins wore off, and I was dealing with the pain. Which is why, when you run, for example, and then you stop, you're still panting for a while, because your body is trying to get rid of the lactic acid, and it needs the oxygen, so you end up panting for a while afterwards to get rid of that. So that's endorphins, and that's a chemical that kind of helps us to feel good. Another one is dopamine. And dopamine gives you the sense of satisfaction you get when you achieve something, or when you acquire something. So let's say, for example, you've lost something, you've lost your car keys, and you hunt around the house, and when you find them you get that feeling. That's dopamine. Or alternatively, if you go out shopping and you're searching for just that right shirt, and then you find it, it's like, ah, I got it! That feeling of, aha, that's dopamine. And dopamine's a really cool drug, because what it does is that it enables us to get things done. Because the interesting thing about dopamine is that you don't just get a shot of dopamine when you physically see something, you also get a shot of dopamine when you imagine something. Which is why all the self-help gurus tell you to write down your goals. Because we're visual creatures, and whenever you see it, you get this little shot of dopamine, which makes you feel good, which then helps you move towards it, and that's how it works. It's one of the reasons why we have a vision statement, and we have it written down. Our vision statement is, we call for a world where LGBTQ people live free from discrimination. And it's something that we can see. It's a goal that we can imagine what it's like to have a world where there is no discrimination. And then what happens is, as we do little things that just move us towards it, even edge us towards it so slowly, we have these little triumphs, we get little shots of dopamine and go, ah, you're getting closer, you're getting nearer. Without the goal, that wouldn't happen. And the reason is because that's the way dopamine works, and that's the way that the body works. It also works if you have a to-do list, and you strike things off during the day. You know, when you strike something off, you get that feeling. That's dopamine. And at the end of the day, when you've done the whole thing and you get that, then that's dopamine. It's a really cool drug. The only problem with dopamine is that, unlike endorphins, or much, much greater extent than endorphins, dopamine is, or can be, really addictive. So some other things that cause dopamine rushes are alcohol, nicotine, gambling. So effectively what happens is that if we're not careful, we can end up in a situation where we have a behavior which triggers dopamine, and we end up doing that behavior to the expense of our relationships and our resources. So for example, somebody collects things, and before you know it, the whole house is taken over. And whenever they're out, all they can do is think about collecting that one thing, because every time they find one, they get that shot of dopamine, and it's an addiction. Or the person who can't stop shopping, because every time they find something that's a bargain, they get a shot of dopamine, and it takes over. So dopamine is very, very useful when it's in balance, but when it's out of balance, it's really it's difficult. It can be a difficult one to deal with. Now, the thing about dopamine and endorphins are that you don't need anybody else to get them. Put a line in there. There we go. You don't need anybody else to get these two things. Go and work out at the gym, and you'll probably experience, sooner or later, in my case sooner, some endorphins. Dopamine. Have a goal. Decide that you're going to plant all those bedding plants in one morning, go out and do it, and when you're finished, you'll get a little shot of dopamine. You don't need anybody else to get these two things, and they make you feel good. So these two are different. Serotonin and oxytocin, they're known as the relationship chemicals. Serotonin, for example, tends to be called the leadership chemical. And the reason is because serotonin is responsible for feelings of pride and feelings of self-esteem. So when you do something that makes you proud, and that feeling of, that's serotonin. Now, also, if you know somebody and they do something that makes you proud, you get a shot of serotonin. And when you see a situation where somebody's doing something that makes you proud, let's say, for example, somebody does something for somebody else without expecting anything in return, that creates shots of serotonin, which then make you feel good and make you feel proud. Years ago, I remember I ran an Amway business, and this was back in the early 90s, and we had, after a couple of months, quite a large group. And there was about 40 of us, I think, went to the NEC in Birmingham. And if you know anything about Amway, what they did, I don't know if they still do, but what they did was they had tiers of benefits, percentages. So depending how much stuff you sold, soap powder and soap and all kinds of stuff, depending how much you sold, you got 3% of that as a bonus to 21%, which was kind of the top whack. And pretty quickly I was on 15%. So we were asked to walk across stage at the NEC in Birmingham, my partner and I. So we get up there, and there's 15,000 people in this arena, and all the people who've done 21%, there's maybe a dozen of them walk across stage, and then there's maybe, I don't know, 15 or so people who've reached 18%, and then the people who've reached 15%, there's maybe 20 of us. So we walk across stage, and I walk across, and there's just these vast crowds, you know, just all cheering and clapping, and there's this real hit of serotonin. It's like, look at me, you know, I'm walking across stage, there's all these people, I think I'm so cool, yeah, you know, that's serotonin. Interestingly, all the people that we took with us, they're experiencing exactly the same thing. They're getting the same hit, they're like, it's Mike, look, he's there and he's walking across stage, yeah, I'm so proud. And so, what it does is it engenders the relationship between both myself and the people in the group, which is one of the reasons that we do it. One of the reasons why we give awards. If you think about college, you know, when you finish college, they could just send you an email. You've passed, well done. There's a PDF of your, you know, of your diploma here. Just print it out, and it's good to go. But we don't. What we do is we have ceremonies where people dress up in gowns and funny hats, and we hand out little scrolls, and we take the family there, and they watch people walk across stage, and they go, yeah, we're so proud, yeah. And all of that is about serotonin. All of that is about relationship building. Now, the only problem with serotonin is that although it makes us feel really, really good, and it's designed to help us build relationships, we can fool it. We can fool the body into producing serotonin. And we do this by shortcutting the process. So instead of doing something that helps us to create self-esteem, like going out and doing some work with a charity, instead of doing that, what we do is we go out and we buy a Rolex, because that makes us feel really sort of superior. Or the next door neighbours have double glazing at the front, so we double glaze the front and the back. And we don't do it because we want a nice house that's nice and warm during the winter. We do it because we want to be one better than them. And when you do that, you get a shot of serotonin because your self-esteem gets lifted a little bit. Problem is that you didn't do anything to get it. Not really. So since there's no relationship formed, then at some point everything feels really empty. Which is why folks who've won the lottery, there's a couple of programs about some of the folks who've won, and they've had millions and millions, and they've spent it all, and at the end they said, you know what, we wish we'd never won it, it just ruined our lives. We had all these things, and it was empty. There was nothing there. It was just, you know. And the reason is because you shortcut the process, you've got all the serotonin, you feel good, but there was no relationship built in the process. And it's the relationship that creates a sense of fulfillment, and it's the relationship that creates that sense of connectedness, which then enriches our lives and makes us feel connected to everyone else. One of the ways to get serotonin, as I said, is to do something for somebody else without expecting anything in return. The odd thing is that money doesn't count. It doesn't work. And the reason is, I think, because there's no time commitments involved. So if I said to you that a couple of weeks ago, Chris and Nigel and Jerry and Keith each put together £50 as a donation to the Terence Higgins Trust, you'd go, that's nice. That's cool. Well done. Now, but if I said to you that Chris and Keith and Nigel and Jerry spent 4 hours making the Duke's Mount Park area safe for children to use during the day, which is what happened, then you think, wow, good on you. You know what, we should do more. And the reason is because it's the time. Now, the money that, if they'd given the money instead, they could have hired some people to do that. More people than, you know, and spend more time. But it's not that counts. And I think the reason is because time is the one commodity that we all have the equal amount of. You know, regardless of whether you're a millionaire or you're absolutely stone broke, you've got 24 hours in a day. So if I put a little note on Facebook, and the note says, let's have a look. The note says, happy birthday, hope you have a wonderful day, thinking of you, Mike and Chris. Then you go, nah, it's not the note. But if you get a card through the post that says, hi, happy birthday, hope you have a lovely day, love, Michael and Chris, you're like, oh, that's really nice, I got a card. Now, it's the same thing. We wrote exactly the same thing on Facebook as we did in the card. But the card means something. Why? Because somebody had to go and buy the card. They had to think about me while they were buying it. They had to then write the card out and think about what to write. And I know they did because it's their handwritten. And then they had to find a stamp and put a stamp on it. And then they had to walk to the post office and post it. And those things take time. And time is what matters. So, oddly enough, it's spending time with each other and for each other that produces serotonin and then binds people together. That's what creates relationships, and that's what serotonin does. The last one is oxytocin, and oxytocin is quite often called the love hormone. It's that feeling of love, of trust. Simon Sinek says that it's all unicorns and rainbows. It's triggered by touch and proximity, which is why we like to hang out with friends even if we're not doing anything. Even if we're just watching TV together, it's nice to sit with friends and do it. It's nicer to do that than be on our own. Even if we don't say 2 words, it's nicer to hang out with friends than to be on our own. And the reason is because proximity releases oxytocin, which makes us feel connected. It makes us feel safe, and it engenders trust. And there's lots of ways to get oxytocin. Now, obviously, there's touch, which is one of the reasons why we shake hands on a business deal. I mean, that's thousands of years old, and the reason is because it's the touching that releases the oxytocin, which then creates the feeling of trust that binds the deal, because the oxytocin is released in each person. So, and if you, let's say for example, you have somebody who comes to the house and they give you a quote on an extension. And you've had some quotes before, this one's a really good one, you've heard of the company, there's been some good reports, and so you decide this is what we'll do, we'll sign on the dotted line, you get a contract out, you write it up, you agree a price, you sign the contract, and then you say, that's great, so we'll see you next Monday, and you put your hand out to shake their hand, and they go, no, it's okay, we'll be here on Monday, and you'll see us then. Immediately there's this feeling of there's something wrong. If they won't shake my hand, there's something wrong. Something here that doesn't feel right. And the reason is that oxytocin that would have been met in shaking hands is not there. So the feeling of trust isn't there, and the whole thing will feel weird. And invariably what happens is that if somebody refuses to shake their hand, the deal will go sour. Something will happen, and you'll think, no, you know what, I felt something there, I knew something, you know, shouldn't have happened, I shouldn't have done that. That's what oxytocin does. Let's have a look. So oxytocin, again, one of the ways you can get it is by doing something for somebody else that you don't expect anything in return. We have 2 beagles. You've seen them, haven't you? Pebbles and Odie. The other day I was sat on the bed working, and they both got up and they were sat on the bed, the 2 of them. They were both just sleeping, one eye on me, just looking. And I looked at the 2 dogs and I thought, oh gosh, I remember Pebbles when we got her. When we found her, she was about 6 months old. She'd been tied to the railings of the fire station. And they couldn't see her because there was a ramp that went up and down, and she was below the level of the ramp, so they couldn't see her from the fire station. So they didn't know she was there. And it was 100-degree heat, and she'd been there, I think, most of the morning. So I got down to work, and the first thing I saw her there, so I went out with a bowl of water and gave her a bowl of water. She drank the whole thing, so I went and got some more, and she drank that. And then I could see from my office window that she was still there. In half an hour, she was still there. Half an hour later, and I thought, you know, somebody's just left her and gone off for some reason. And I couldn't think what could have happened. So I went across to the fire station, took her in and said, look, she's outside tied up. It's terribly hot. Can you take her in? And we'll just leave a note on the railing saying, your dog's in the fire station, come and get her. Fine, they said. So we did that, and about 7 o'clock I got a phone call saying, nobody's been for her, she's still here. So we went across and we got her, and we brought her home, and Chris was like, do not want a dog. You know what will happen if we get a dog? I'll be the one that walks her, I'll be the one that feeds her. And I'm like, no, look at this, she's this. Of course, you know, who feeds her, who walks her. But she, you know, and I look at her now, and she's such a beautiful little dog. And I think about what could have happened that day. You know, she could quite easily have died in that heat. And then when we got Odie, you know, you could put your fingers like that around his back end. When he walked, all you could see was skin and bone. There was nothing else. It was just skin and bone. You could see every rib. It was just, he was completely emaciated. And Chris was like, this is the one. I'm like, are you sure? And he's like, yeah. And now I look at him, and he's, you know, and he's just a bit touched, bless him, and he's got his one blue eye and his one brown eye. He looks a bit cockeyed at you sometimes, but then, you know, he'll come up on the bed and he'll just rest his head on you and just look up at you, and it's like, what do you want? And he's like, no, I just thought I'd lie here with my head on you. And it's just, it's lovely. And as I'm sat there on the bed and I'm feeling really rather good, I suddenly thought, oh, that's the serotonin. That's what's happened, because I'm thinking about the dogs. So doing something creates a shot of serotonin. Thinking about it creates a shot of serotonin, which is why if you go onto Facebook, you scout down just a few pages, and I guarantee you, you will find a video of somebody who rescues a dog. It'll be someone who finds this terribly emaciated thing that's, you know, in a yard somewhere, and they take it and they take it to the vet, and it has to have all its fur cut off, and the poor thing's terrible, it's frightened and scared. And at the end, the dog's all jumping about, it's happy and it loves everyone, it's got a new home and it's all healthy. And what's our reaction? I don't know about you, but I cry. I'm like, oh, beautiful dog. That's oxytocin, sorry. That's that extraordinary chemical, and that's what it does. When a mother gives birth to a child, the body is flooded with oxytocin. I mean, absolutely flooded, which is why when the child is born, the mother looks at the child, and that child is the most important thing in the whole wide world. It's because this oxytocin just floods the system and makes that connection. Oxytocin is really important. It's one of the reasons, I think, why Jesus touched so much. You know, Jesus didn't need to touch people to heal them. Do you remember the story about the Canaanite woman who came to him and said, will you please heal my daughter? The daughter's miles away. And all Jesus says is, your daughter's healed, and miles away, the daughter is healed. So Jesus did not need to touch people to heal them, and yet he did touch them. Why? And I think because touch is really important. The way that we connect with each other is really important. A couple of other things that oxytocin does. Oxytocin decreases pain. And oxytocin stimulates the immune system. I remember when I first started working as a chaplain, I'd gone through this training thing that the hospital do, you know, on appropriate stuff. You know, like, don't touch anyone unless they invite you to touch them, you know, all this kind of stuff. And my first patient that I went in to see was an elderly patient. She was in her late 80s, and she'd been brought in, and they didn't know what was wrong. And she was in a lot of pain. She was in ICU, and she was in critical care. And they couldn't give her anything for the pain because they were still doing tests to find out what was wrong, and they didn't want to mask anything so that they'd misdiagnose. So she was just lying there in pain. And I went across, and my first instinct was just to reach out and take her hand. And I took her hand, and immediately she just sighed and just relaxed a little. And as I sat with her, I didn't say anything. And again, it was just instinct. I reached out and I just stroked her hair. And I just continued to stroke her hair. And after a few minutes, she relaxed, and I could see all the lines start to disappear, and she fell asleep. That's what oxytocin does. That's the way that touch works. It's very, very powerful. It's also now there's one more chemical that I want to talk about, And this one is big C. It's called cortisol. You know what cortisol is? Okay. These are the happy ones. This is not. This is the stress chemical. Cortisol is created. It's released by the primitive part of our brain, the part of our brain that doesn't have any language skills, that can't communicate with us, and reacts in terms of chemicals. And cortisol is one of the chemicals. And what it does is it makes us paranoid, and it makes us worried. And the reason is because, have you ever had that situation where you've walked down a street, and you may have walked down it 100 times, and that one night you walk down the street and suddenly you feel like there's something wrong, and you feel the hairs on the back of your neck start to rise, and you feel all your senses start to heighten, like you're listening for something and you're looking for something, and you know what the best thing to do in that situation is to get the heck out of there as quickly as you can. And the reason is because the primitive part of our brain monitors parts of our senses that we don't actively monitor. So, for example, your peripheral vision is excellent. It's absolutely superb because it's designed to look out for danger. And if you doubt that, then go out on a starry night and just stare at one fixed point, and you'll find that these stars start to twinkle out in the peripheral vision. And then when you look at them, they disappear. And the reason is because the colour piece of your eyes in the centre can't see as well as the black and white bits which are on the peripheral vision. Now, you don't monitor that actively, you don't notice it, but there's a part of your brain that's always watching out for danger and is aware of that. So, now, if it spots anything, it doesn't say to you, there's something on your peripheral vision. What it does is it pumps cortisol into your body, which makes you feel paranoid and make you go, something's wrong, something's wrong. And that's what it does. It's also the... your hearing is much more acute than you would think, and your sense of smell. You're not aware that you're able to pick up quite low levels of pheromones. But if, for example, there's somebody waiting for you, and they're giving off pheromones because they're under stress, because they're excited, because they're waiting to pounce, then sometimes your body can pick up that scent, even though you're not aware of it. And the only way that your primitive brain can tell you is by pumping cortisol into your body, which makes you then feel paranoid and it makes you look around. It's a little bit like, have you seen those wildlife programs when there's a gazelle, there's a whole herd of gazelle, and one gazelle suddenly goes, and looks up like this, and starts looking around. And that's what cortisol does. Now, the interesting thing is that when it happens in a group, one gazelle goes, and looks around, and then they all go, and they all look around. And hopefully one of them will see the lion that's sneaking through the grass, and they'll all run and they're all safe. It's a great system. Except when it happens at work, or it happens in church, then it's not great, because that same system doesn't differentiate between you being hunted and the need for fight or flight, or you feeling unsafe because you might be verbally attacked, or you might be undermined in some fashion. If you've got a boss that's constantly undermining you, if you never know when they're going to attack you and make you feel unsafe, then what will happen is that your body will start to drip cortisol into you. So, you see, the thing about cortisol is that it's supposed to be in your body for a few seconds and then gone. Because what will happen is that, one of two things, the cortisol will hit your bloodstream, you'll get paranoid, you'll look around, you'll either see something, and at that point the adrenaline kicks in and you run, or you fight. Alternatively, you look around and go, there's nothing, and the cortisol leaves your body. It's why if you wake up in the night, if you've heard something, the first thing you do is you go to your partner, you wake up and go, hey, I think I heard something. And that's that reaction, that's that cortisol at work. If we're in a situation at work where we don't feel safe, then all during the day, primitive part of our brain that doesn't understand that this is work, because it has no language skills, it's constantly dripping cortisol into you, which means that you're under stress. It also means, the interesting thing about cortisol is that when the body is flooded with cortisol, it makes sure that you are ready for fight or flight. So it closes down non-essential systems. So it closes down your immune system, and it closes down your growth system. Because you don't need to grow your fingernails when you're about to run for your life. And you don't need to worry about bacteria or viruses when you're about to run for your life. So it closes these systems down. So when you're in a job that you don't feel safe in, suddenly you find that you're always ill. And the reason is not because you're a hypochondriac and you're pretending to be ill to get off work. The reason is because you've got cortisol dripping into your system, your immune system's absolutely shot, and you're coming down with whatever's going around. That's exactly why. And the same thing happens in any group. If we have that at church, if we have a situation where we don't feel safe, then again, we have cortisol running through our body. One, we become paranoid. So always like, oh, what do you think of this person? What do you think they're doing? And that happens. And we always feel like we're on guard. That's why it's so important that we all feel safe. We need to feel safe from homophobic comments, safe from sexist remarks, safe from predatory behaviour, safe because we all try our best to support each other, especially when we get it wrong. In chemical terms, it's oxytocin and not cortisol. So it's relaxed and not stressed. It's loved and not paranoid. It's safe and not insecure. And the Apostle John from tonight's reading seems to understand this because he knows about love in action and how important that is and why people are so important. Perfect love casts out fear, he says. Well, chemically, he's absolutely right. We are complicated creatures. I've only talked about 5 of the chemicals that make up our biology, and there are hundreds of them. And I'm certainly no expert. In fact, if you're interested in the relationship between biology and chemistry, then there's lots of information on the internet. If you found that anything really interesting, let me know, because I'd love to hear it. The bottom line is that we are designed for relationship with God, with each other. In healthy relationships, there is joy, and there is healing, and there is fulfillment. That's the way that we're geared. It's the way that we're made. We get taught that everything we need is out there, when in fact, everything we need is right here. And everything is right here in this room. It's within us, and it's within each other. It's in the relationships that we forge with one another and the work that we do in community. When Jesus called us to be in community, I think this is what he had in mind. You know, Troy focused on those actions that help to be relationship, to help to build relationships. You hear it when he speaks about the people that he works with and has worked with over the years. It's all about relationships. It's all about these 2 things here. And at the psychological level, the physiological level, we understand how that works and how that happens. And I think that what that does is it shows us that potential to be a hero, someone who seeks to serve other people and to bring the best out of them, I think that's actually within each and every one of us. Amen.